All right, thank you so much for sticking around to the last session. I appreciate that. So my name is Nicole Shantz. I'm from AirZOne 1, which is an air quality consulting company located in Mississauga, which is about an hour from here or so, maybe longer in traffic. I would like to tell you about what turned out to be actually a simple case study in an odor investigation and assessment for a facility in the food industry. So it's a little different than what we've talked about before, but hope you find it interesting. Nope. Nope. One of these will work. No, not that one. Just do that. All right. So the button. Okay, so you heard a little bit about AirZOne before. Margaret Matusa gave a nice talk this morning. So AirZone's an air quality company, and we have all sorts of different services that we offer. So Margaret gave a talk earlier about largely about the lab analysis that we complete. I'm part of the modeling group, and I do a lot of permitting and emission reporting. I also do odor assessments, and in terms of land use, also in terms of land use compatibility. Okay, so the air emissions permitting system, facilities in Ontario are required to obtain a permit in order to emit air contaminants. So the Ontario Environmental Protection Act prohibits discharge of contaminants into the natural environment that would cause adverse effects. So a contaminant, legally speaking, in Ontario, could be a solid, liquid, gas, odor, heat, sound, vibration, radiation, or a combination of those things. That would be a result, directly or indirectly, of human activities that may cause an adverse effect. So a permit may be issued if air emissions from a facility do not cause a significant adverse effect. In other words, they demonstrate compliance. So the MOECC is the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. That is the regulatory body in the province of Ontario. They require a permit for odors. So if there's odor complaints or a history of odor from a facility, air dispersion modeling might be required. And an example of that would be AirMod, which is commonly used. AirMod can help determine impacts of odors from a facility on sensitive receptors at the property line or beyond. However, you may have a case where you have sensitive receptors within the property line, and that would be called same structure contamination. You may be asked to use ASHRAE calculations in that case. So an example of that is if you have an industrial mall and you need to assess the emissions on your neighbors, the neighbors surrounding you in the industrial mall, you may be required to use ASHRAE calculations in order to determine the concentrations of the contaminant at the nearest openable windows or doors or air intakes. So just a brief overview of this particular case study. There was complaints launched against a frozen food manufacturer in Ontario whose facility was located within an industrial mall. The complaints were from the unit next door within this industrial complex, and these were office units. So the MOECC asked for odor modeling using AirMod or ASHRAE in order to deal with these complaints that were issued. AirZOne was hired to do this work, and we found that modeling didn't apply in this case. So that's just an overview of where I'm headed with this. So just a little overview of the frozen food company operations. One of the aspects of this company involves assembling dim sum meat and vegetable buns. Some of the raw materials that were used are dough ingredients, which was the outside of the bun. Bun filling, so that would be meat and vegetables. And some of the there was many vegetables used, but some of the vegetables included green onions, leeks, and cabbage. Some of these buns were steamed, packaged, and then frozen and shipped. And other buns were only packaged, frozen, and shipped. So some of them were steamed and some of them weren't steamed. The operations and production remain largely the same from day to day, and the hours of operation were 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Okay, so this is just a picture of the industrial complex. We have here the frozen food company is shown in red, and beside it, shown in blue, is Unit 9 where the complaints were issued. And on the other side, there was another unit, also office-type place, and there were no complaints issued from that place. There's also single-family houses nearby, and no complaints, as far as I know, were ever launched by those in those residences. And the prevailing wind direction was largely in this direction, so from where the complaints were, in the direction of the frozen food company. So from 2011 to 2014, Unit 9 next door, the offices next door, to the frozen food company, launched odor complaints to the building management and to the MOECC. The descriptions of the odor were pretty severe. So they said it smelled like skunk, dead smells, garbage smells, baking smells, onion smells. They also described these odors as overwhelming, nauseating, and so offensive that they couldn't work. So they sounded pretty severe. The complaints tended to be in the mornings, and they didn't happen every day. Just as a note, I never smelled that when I was at the facility. That was difficult to assess odors if you can't even smell it, but I'll talk about that a bit more. So AirZone's role. Originally, AirZone was hired by the frozen food company to assist in applying for the emissions permit for the MOECC. The MOE had identified the food steamer and other gas-fired equipment that exhausted from the roof. They identified that as being emitting to the environment, so therefore required a permit application. Because of the severity of the complaints, we also were asked to provide consultation for these alleged odor issues that were purportedly caused by the frozen food company. So the MOECC asked for a lot of things when they went into the review of the application. I'll just summarize just two of the things that they asked for, which is relevant to this talk. They asked for evaluation of the intensity of the odor emissions, either in odor units or in mass emissions of the representative odorous chemicals. And they asked to quantify the odor emissions and impacts at the representative receptors on and off site using AirMod or ASHRAE in order to deal with these complaints. The inspector who had been to the site location believed that the odor was exhausting from the steamer exhaust at the frozen food company and entered Unit 9 offices next door via the rooftop. So that's where we started with our investigation. So it seems like neither of my pointers are working, so I will just... So there's a picture there of the dim sum buns being prepared prior to being steamed. Then they go into the steamer on those little trays. The exhaust canopy is where the air from the steamer would go off onto the roof. Okay, so this is an image of the rooftop. So the frozen food steamer's on the far side. The distance between the frozen food steamer exhaust and Unit 9, where the complaints were coming from, the HVAC system's about 13 meters. In between them is the frozen food HVAC system as well. The day that I was there for the site visit up on the roof, the approximate wind direction was from where the complaints are coming from towards the steamer. So we did a number of investigations through site visits, investigating this possibility of odor transmission. And what we did is we went up on the roof when the steamer was off and noted if we noticed any odors, and we didn't smell anything. And then we had them put on the steamer with the dim sum buns in the steamer. And again, we went up on the roof and we didn't smell anything again. So we didn't detect any odors with the steamer on or off. and we believe that that was not actually the transmission route. So if we weren't even able to sense the odors when we were there, it was going to be very difficult to do what the MOE asked, to provide emission, the source emission rate of odor units when we couldn't even measure it ourselves. Also, that meant modeling the steamer exhaust using the ASHRAE model or using AirMod model wouldn't have provided any kind of useful information. So it's just zooming in just to show you again where the steamer exhaust is in comparison to the neighbor's HVAC system. And the prevailing wind direction goes in the opposite direction. So our observations in terms of the steamer and the rooftop exhaust, we believe that the frozen food steamer was not an odor source, despite the suggestions that the MOE believed that that was where the odor was traveling from. The steamer to HVAC next door is not in the predominant wind direction, as I mentioned already. The complaints were, this is another point that I didn't mention really yet, the complaints were described as an onion smell. And onions are used at the facility, but onions were not actually ever entering the steamer operations. Those buns that went into the steamer never had any onions in them. Also, the steamer operated in the afternoon, and the complaints usually occurred first thing in the morning. So there were a few clues. So because of that, we had to investigate other options, other possibilities. So the next thought that we had was maybe it had to do with the ventilation. Since the odor was not transmitted via the rooftop HVAC system, we investigated the theory of possibility of internal transmission. So the reasons we started to look into that is the frozen food company also observed an odor inside of their front foyer in the mornings, and that might have been coinciding at the same time as when the neighbor next door was noticing the odor at their facility first thing in the morning. So the frozen food company had been having issues with the operation of HVAC systems, we started to learn, and their ventilation, and it's possible that there had been some kind of stagnant air in their front foyer. The odors were always detected in the offices next door upon arrival in the mornings, and then the offices next door would start up their HVAC system once everyone was at work. After they arrived in the mornings and throughout the day, the odor seemed to dissipate. Sometimes it didn't, but a lot of times, through investigation of the odor complaints, it seemed like it would dissipate as their HVAC system would be running. So if it was bringing in odor from next door, from the rooftop, that probably wouldn't be happening. So because we actually never sensed the odor ourselves, we had to do investigations in other ways by determining through interviews with the different employees at both facilities, reviewing all the odor complaint logs and the descriptions, site visits, and FIDOL. We found that the more likely reason for the purported odors next door was due to the transmission through the walls, and we gave a couple of suggestions to try until we get this whole thing sorted out. We suggested continuously operating the fan system on the HVAC to keep the air in the foyer circulating, and to hire a ventilation engineer to assess the potential for air balance issues, which might have been an issue and was investigated. And we also suggested doing wall inspections for leak points. So the result of the investigation, after all of that, it turned out that mitigation by modifying the HVAC system to provide proper ventilation of the stagnant odorous air was completed, and they continuously ran the fan in the front foyer. And by doing that, the odor complaints seemed to dissipate, and it seemed to be working. So, like I said, it was a simple case. It started off quite complicated, but became quite simple in the end. So the alleged odor transmission between the two units, if there was even odor transmission, likely occurred internally via the internal walls, rather than externally via the rooftop exhausts and air intakes. The front foyer of the frozen food company was set to run continuously as a mitigation option, and further mitigation options were implemented by a ventilation engineer, and that was completed. In the end, the MOECC accepted our assessment, and they didn't actually require any odor measurements in the end, even though they asked for it, and they didn't need any modeling. They were happy with what we did. So we saved our client money, so that's always good. and the company received their permit, and the complaints have ceased. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.